One more try. Jim Butcher isn't a maker of new things. Rather, he takes a couple old things and mixes them to make them better. Not a brewmaster then, but a bartender. He finds a couple stories that are good on their own, mixes them, and makes them better in the mixing. Don't take that as a denigration of his works. Far from it. In fact, he's a man with an incredible talent for mixing the perfect blends for the stories he wants to tell. And really, there's a lot more to a cocktail than the base ingredients used to make it. Stormfront is a perfect example of this. It's a detective novel very much in the classic sense, all the way to the hard-nosed PI with a heart of gold who's always a little down on his luck. It's also a story of magic in the modern world from the perspective of a surly, ever-put-upon wizard. A splash of Chicago mob influence, a sprig of the past here to haunt you, a drop of romance, served with 2 cubes of politics, and line the glass with a bit of fairy dust. Savor it, it goes down smooth. Butcher uses a lot of color and metaphor in his description of the world and of the people around Dresden, so much that it stretches sometimes into a sort of prose poetry. The characters are lifted from the page whole with the details given as Butcher describes them, and the scenarios are vivid enough you can almost sink into them. The novel is written in the voice of Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden, Wizard for Hire. Like with the old noir classics, Dresden is wry, sarcastic, and entirely candid while he recalls the story to the audience. He banters with the reader at times, even while explaining the world. It's easy to imagine Dresden starting by mentioning that it was a dark and stormy night, if only it wasn't the morning after. As with every detective novel, Dresden is driven to act by dint of the problems he has rather than the problems he's hired to work on. He's behind on his rent, low on cash, and the only semi-regular work he has is as a consultant for the local police. So when a woman comes in with a retainer asking for him to find her missing husband on the same day the police ask him to help with a double murder investigation, things are looking up for him. Except the mob doesn't want him getting involved with the case, as the local mob boss wants to deal with it on his own since one of the deceased was his man, and the police want him to look into figuring out how the spell used to kill the 2 people was performed. If he does the research, he could get in trouble for practicing black magic by the White Council, the heads of the wizarding world, and be executed. If he doesn't do the research, the police may never hire him again. And Dresden, being on a sort of magical probation in the first place, is the White Council's first suspect for the murders he's trying to help the mundane police with. So he has to prove his innocence or be executed. Damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. Karen Murphy is the detective that hires Harry to help on the murder case in the very beginning. She's the director of special investigations, the poor schmucks who have to deal with the unusual, sometimes supernatural cases. The cases the rest of the department doesn't want to touch. She's smart, hardened, and good enough to have fought her way up the ranks in the Chicago PD. In order to give Harry an excuse to describe himself, Butcher has Dresden compare himself to her, saying, "Karen and I are a study in contrasts. Where I am tall and lean, she's short and stocky. Where I have dark hair and eyes, she's got Shirley Temple blonde locks and baby blues. Where my features are all lean and angular, with a hawkish nose and a sharp chin, hers are round and smooth, with the kind of cute nose you'd expect on a cheerleader. She was built for function, and had a pair of trophies in her office from Aikido tournaments to prove it. She looked more like a favorite aunt or cheerful mother than a hard-bitten homicide detective. Murphy was the original tough girl, and she prided herself on never showing weakness. Because of this case, Dresden meets gentleman Johnny Marcone, the mobster who rules Chicago's underworld, whose eyes are the green of well-worn dollar bills. Dresden accidentally looks on Marcone's soul in their first meeting, and sees who he is behind that relaxed smile and fatherly manner. Marcone is strong inside, savage and merciless without being cruel. He had a tiger's soul. Because it's a detective novel, Dresden does inevitably wind up at a bar. In this case, the bar is McAnally's. It's a pub, really, built with magic users in mind, all set in 13s, and still allowing the occupants to smoke their pipes while drinking their beers, playing chess, or talking quietly amongst themselves. And you'll find no jukebox or arcade games in McAnally's. Wizards and new technology don't mix. No one knows why. Mac, the owner, is the perfect bartender. Practically silent, unassuming, more like the last set piece that balances out the bar than a character unto himself. Or, perhaps, as if the bar itself is an extension of him. As if he seems normal strictly because of who and where he is. Mac doesn't take sides. Mac is wise. As is common in these sorts of stories, magic is sort of an open secret. Everyone has heard of wizards and fairies and vampires and demons and curses and spells, but no one actually believes in such wild things. Most of the people in the know stay fairly quiet about it. But, of course, where there are secrets, there are people who will dig at them until they find them. Enter Susan Rodriguez, stubborn reporter for a yellow rag called The Arcane. A woman of average height and striking dark beauty. She's perceptive, curious, and smart enough to constantly throw Harry off kilter. And, of course, because he won't divulge everything he knows to her, she tricks him into a date that promises to be more interrogation than romance. Well, Harry hopes otherwise, but he's pretty sure he threw himself to the wolves with a ribbon on. Every good wizard needs a familiar. Dresden's is Bob the Skull. Bob, an ancient spirit of intellect, is a chatty, lewd, extremely knowledgeable lab assistant bound in a skull where he can advise Dresden on the application of spells and the preparation of magical creations while giving Harry far more lip than any skull should possess. Worse, Bob is irreplaceable and knows it, which puts him and Harry on a level field in their relationship that allows Bob to use Harry as much as Harry uses Bob. Butcher reveals the world of Harry Dresden both through the direction of the story and through quips and asides Harry makes as he describes things that are, to him, commonplace. For example, he explains his decision not to work with Marcone as not having liked Francis Ford Coppola and not having a godfather. Then he quips, "I do have a godmother, and she is, inevitably perhaps, a fairy, but that's another story," subtly slipping in a bit of otherwise insignificant information in a way that says, "This is here, but not now, stick around." I both read books and listen to their audiobook versions. The Dresden Files novels are read by James Marsters. I like his voice and his cadence very much. I think his is a perfect voice for this sort of story. There is one thing that I noticed that I thought was worth mentioning, though. Now, I'm used to there being differences between reading and listening to a book. Most narrators will mispronounce a few words, especially names, or substitute one word for another as they're talking. That's normal and usually doesn't affect the flow of the story. But there was something slightly different with Marsters that wouldn't be noticed unless you were reading in time with him as I was. He seems to add a few scattered sentences and an entire paragraph in one place, and he changes the name of a bit character from one scene entirely. None of his additions break from the flow of the story, nor do they seem out of place in the least, so it's not a problem as far as I'm concerned. I'm reading the Rockmass paperback version, printed after Skin Game came out in 2015, and Marsters' reading is from 2002, so he's using a different edition. And that may just be it. But if that's the case, it begs the question as to why Rock omitted those bits of story, and why they changed the character's name. In all, the book is a great read. It's nothing new, but is instead a reimagining of what was old. A Kintsukuroi of sorts, taking something old and forgotten and putting it back together in a way that is basically the same as it was before, but with a new flair that makes it shine brighter than when it was new.